When Don Bowie descends to the cache point below Camp 4 to retrieve oxygen for his dying teammate, he discovers that the gear is gone. The tent, the cylinders, the medical supplies, everything they had left on the slope days earlier is no longer there. Bowie stands at 7,400 meters in the wind, staring at an empty patch of snow. Above him, in the tent at Camp 4, lies a man with a severe form of altitude sickness who has lost the function of the left side of his body. Far below, in Pamplona, his wife and his brother are pressing a satellite phone to their ear. Between those 2 points lie 100 meters of altitude and 10 hours of time. This episode is part of the largest international rescue operation in Himalayan history. On a single route, 12 people from 10 countries converge: a Swiss climber, a Kazakh, 2 Russians, a Romanian, several Spaniards, a Canadian, and a few more who join in from neighboring expeditions. Each of them, in everyday life, is a star of his own school of mountaineering. Here, they become one team for 48 hours. And to understand why Don Bowie, the man who had quarreled with the dying climber only weeks before, ended up on the thinnest thread of the entire logistical chain, we have to go back a little to the beginning of that expedition. Annapurna 1 is the 10th highest mountain on the planet, 8,091 meters. On paper, not the highest. In practice, the deadliest of all 14 8,000ers. The French expedition led by Maurice Herzog stood on its summit on the 3rd of June, 1950, 3 years before Everest. It was the first 8,000er in human history that anyone had set foot on at all. Since then, the mountain has given up its summit reluctantly. Toward the end of the 20th century and into the early 21st, the ratio of deaths to successful ascents held at around 32%. For every 3 people who reached the top, 1 death on the slope, the worst statistic of any 8,000er on the planet. Today that number has dropped roughly 2 to 3 times over. Weather forecasts are sharper, gear is lighter, the work of Nepalese sherpas is denser, the logistics of the upper camps are smoother, helicopters fly evacuations from high altitude. The mountain has become safer, but not safe. By historic death rate, Annapurna still shares the top line with K2 and Nanga Parbat, one of the 3 deadliest summits on the planet. This is the story of one of those she took, and 9 more ahead. Don Bowie was born in December 1969 in the Canadian province of Alberta, a professional high-altitude climber and photographer. In his second life, he is a mountain rescuer in California, where he worked with patrols on avalanche-prone slopes. Among his colleagues, he is known as a principled opponent of supplementary oxygen. Bowie believes the cylinder turns mountaineering into a delivery industry that hauls people upward, and he climbs without one, even where others have long switched to a mixed style. This is not a pose or a slogan. It is his working ethic on the mountain, consistent and proven on many 8,000ers. He arrives on Annapurna in the spring of 2008 as part of an international team assembled by the Spanish climber Iñaki Ochoa de Olza. The route is the Southeast Ridge, one of the longest and most technically demanding lines on this face. But within the first weeks on the mountain, he and Ochoa have a serious falling out. Over personality, over style, over the way decisions are made, the details would never be made public in any interview. Bowie breaks away from the team, descends to base camp, and prepares to leave. A few days later, he will turn out to be the only person able to carry the rescue logistics back up the mountain. But he does not yet know any of this, and he is packing his rucksack to head out. Iñaki Ochoa de Olza was born on the 25th of December, 1967, in Pamplona into a Basque family. By the spring of 2008, he is 40 years old, with 12 8,000ers behind him, and in the world of high-altitude mountaineering, he is considered one of the most respected figures of his generation. He climbs without a film camera on his back, without loud statements, without commercial expeditions. In a world where mountaineering increasingly becomes a show with live broadcasts, Ochoa remains a figure of the old school. His reputation is the reputation of a climber who stays human at 8,000 meters. He goes on to Annapurna with his Romanian partner Horia Colibasanu by the Southeast Ridge, long, jagged, with many high camps and long sections where a rescue operation is physically impossible. On the 19th of May, above Camp 4, At an altitude of about 7,850 meters, the left side of Ochoa's body suddenly fails. He stops speaking coherently, loses consciousness, comes back to himself for a few short minutes at a time. Kobayashi understands that this is severe altitude sickness, one of the most dangerous conditions that can strike on an 8,000er, and without a fast descent, the chances are slim. Without losing altitude, his partner will not survive until morning. Alone, with no rope team, with no doctor at his side, on one of the longest faces in the Himalayas, the Romanian begins to drag Ochoa downward. 40 years of life, 12 8,000ers, the reputation of one of the strongest men in the Himalayas, and a single failure of the body that cannot be undone. Kobayashi drags his partner to Camp 4 at 7,400 meters and pushes him into the tent. From there, he is alone, on one of the most difficult faces in the world, beside a man who no longer responds to his voice. Over the radio, he reaches base camp, his voice cracking. The information travels to Europe by satellite link within hours, and then begins what would later go into the books as the largest rescue operation in the high Himalayas. From the neighboring Dhaulagiri, the Swiss climber Wui Kin pulls off. He is in those days running a solo line, and he is one of the very few people who can physically climb to 7,400 meters in a single day. From Kazakhstan, Denis Urubko joins the group, at the time a citizen of Kazakhstan, and one of the strongest high-altitude climbers on the planet. From Russia come Alexei Bolotov and Sergei Bogomolov, both with extensive experience in the upper camps. The Canadian Don Bowie, who had almost reached the bottom and was getting ready to go home, turns around and heads back up the mountain. He is joined by several more people from other expeditions who happened to be on neighboring routes those days. In total, 12 people from 10 countries take part directly or indirectly in the rescue. In Pamplona, the Ochoa family opens its own line. Iñaki's brother and his wife stay on the satellite phone with the mountain, never letting go of the receiver for days on end. The doctor, José Ramón Morandera, a longtime friend of the family, sits down by the phone and begins to advise Kobayashi by voice, how to support his partner, how to keep his breathing steady, what to do if he loses consciousness again. Between Pamplona and a tent at 7,400 meters stretches a thin thread of satellite signal, and along that thread travels every piece of medical care that is possible. Bowie takes on the logistics. He descends below Camp 4 to the spot where, at the start of the expedition, they had left a stockpile, oxygen cylinders, a tent, medical supplies, everything that in a normal expedition is staged at 2 or 3 of the upper points at once. This is the cache, the key point of the entire operation. When Bowie reaches it, the gear is gone, empty. Who took the equipment left behind on the slope and why, he would never find out, neither then nor later. Maybe another expedition, maybe porters, maybe Annapurna herself. The mountain often erases the traces of people in her own way. Bowie has a choice: descend to base camp and pick up a new set, which means another 24 hours that Ochoa no longer has, or turn back up to Camp 4 with whatever he is carrying on his own back, without oxygen. Bowie turns and goes up. He moves for almost a full day, at the limit of what a human being can do, without a cylinder, toward a man with whom he had bitterly quarreled a few weeks earlier, and whom, in all likelihood, he would no longer be able to save. It is this decision that, a year later, will earn him the highest ethical award in Canadian mountaineering. Wui Kin is the first of the rescuers to reach the tent at Camp 4. That alone is a feat. Only the day before, the Swiss climber pulled off a different mountain, and in a single push, he climbed to an altitude that a normal expedition takes a week to reach. He crawls inside the tent, looks at Ochoa, and realizes they are too late. Iñaki is in a critical form of altitude sickness, a condition in which, even at sea level, in an intensive care unit, the chances are almost none. At 7,400 meters, without oxygen, without a full set of equipment, it is a medical dead end. Steck reports this over the radio, down to base camp, and from there to Pamplona. His voice on the air sounds level, but behind that voice is the understanding that the entire machine of 12 people had been set in motion 24 hours too late. Kobayashi has been holding his partner in his arms for several days now. He has not slept, has barely drunk, has not eaten. His own body is approaching the line beyond which he will stop being able to think. The voice of Dr. Morandera keeps coming through the satellite phone. He dictates what else to try, in what order. On the other end of the line are Iñaki's mother, his brother, his wife. They hear all of it. On the 23rd of May, 2008, at 10 minutes past noon, Iñaki Ochoa de Olza stops breathing. He passes away in the arms of Horia Kolobasanu in a tent on the southeast ridge of Annapurna. At the family's request, the body remains on the mountain, so as not to risk the lives of several more people for the descent of someone who is no longer there. Kolobasanu zips the tent closed behind him and starts down. Later, he will say that those 2 days inside the tent were the longest stretch of time in his life. Don Bowie receives the news by radio before he has reached Camp 4. He turns around and starts down himself, in a state close to the one Ochoa had been in. Dehydration, hypoxia, signs of edema, problems with coordination. For several hours he moves half-conscious, navigating by his own footprints in the snow, sitting down to rest from time to time. He will come down alive, but in his own words, he reaches base on pure inertia. The following year, the Alpine Club of Canada will present him with the Spirit of Mountaineering Commendation, the highest ethical award in Canadian mountaineering. In the wording of its decision, the committee will specifically note that Bowie took part in the rescue of a man with whom he had an open conflict, and that he did so without oxygen. 4 years later, the Spanish director Pablo Iraburu will make a documentary about the 23rd of May, 2008, Pura Vida. In it will be the voices of all of them: Kolobasanu, Steck, Urubko, Bowie, the family in Pamplona, Dr. Morandera. The film will become one of the heaviest high-altitude documentaries of the 2010s and will travel through the largest mountain film festivals in the world. After 2008, Bowie returns to Annapurna 5 more times. Each time the mountain refuses him the summit, the weather, the avalanche conditions, an illness in his partner. Only in 2019, 11 years after that day, does he finally stand on its highest point. In his own words, that ascent is the one he considers the closing of the chapter. To journalists' questions about that day, he answers briefly in the same way every time. I did what any person on the mountain should have done. Annapurna took one of them and very nearly took the other. And this story is only one of the 10 that await you in this video. 2 women are climbing along the icy ridge of Annapurna, above 7,000 meters. They are tied together with a rope, moving slowly, tightly, as a single unit. The wind tears dry snow dust off the ridge, and inside that current, the 2 figures on the slope look almost motionless. They belay each other on every step. This is the second summit attempt of their expedition, and it is conceived as a matter of principle, without sherpas, without oxygen, in pure style, which for one of them is almost a religion. Below, in base camp, Arlene Bloom lifts the binoculars to her eyes. She knows roughly where the rope team should be, on the steep ice slope below the central peak. There, against the snow, you can make out tiny dots if you know where to look. Bloom looks for a long time. She lowers the binoculars, waits a few minutes, and lifts them again. The dots do not appear. An hour later, there is still no answer on the radio. To understand what is happening on that slope, and why 2 women ended up there without sherpas, without oxygen, and without witnesses, you have to rewind only 48 hours. Within those 2 days, the same expedition completed a historic first ascent and lost 2 of its members. Between triumph and catastrophe on Annapurna in October of 1978, less than 2 days went by. This is the story of an American women's expedition that, in a single push, brought home both a victory that became a symbol of an era and the loss of 2 climbers who stayed on the mountain. A story in which the slogan from the t-shirts, "A woman's place is on top," became a fact one day and turned into an epitaph the next. And to tell it honestly, you have to go back to August of that same year, to San Francisco, where everything begins with 13 women, plane tickets to Nepal, and a stack of unsold t-shirts. August of 1978, San Francisco. 13 women gather at the airport with a mountain of crates and rucksacks. Their leader is Arlene Bloom, a biochemist by training and a climber by calling. The goal is Annapurna 1 in the Nepalese Himalayas, 8,091 meters, the 10th highest peak in the world. At that point, only a handful of climbers had ever stood on Annapurna's main summit, and all of them were men. The mountain had a reputation as one of the deadliest in the Himalayas, with statistics that scared off even seasoned teams. The expedition has a serious problem. There is no money. Sponsors don't want to invest in a women's team, and the classic mountaineering funds turn them down. Bloom finds a solution that will later become part of American history. The team prints t-shirts with a short line, "A woman's place is on top." It's a deliberate inversion of a phrase that women of this generation have heard since childhood. A woman's place is at home. The t-shirts sell faster than anyone expected. They are bought by climbers, feminists, students, journalists. The slogan ends up in newspapers, then in mountaineering literature, then in the archive of second-wave feminism. It works at once as marketing, as a manifesto, and as a 5-word biography of every one of the 13 team members. By the time of the flight to Nepal, the expedition has money, it has a name, and it has a phrase that now has to be backed up on the slope. Blum understands one thing clearly. If the expedition fails to reach the summit, the slogan turns into a joke. If they reach it at the cost of someone's life, it turns into an accusation. Between those two outcomes, 8,000 meters have to be climbed. And it is out of this very logic that the next decisions are born. There are 2 climbers on the team for whom the personal stakes are higher than for anyone else. And they are the ones who, in the end, will go up the most dangerous slope. Their backgrounds deserve a closer look. Alison Chadwick-Onyszkiewicz, British, born in 1942 in Birmingham. By profession, an artist and an art teacher. By calling, a climber of a new kind. In 1975, her name appears for the first time in the major mountaineering chronicles. Together with Polish climber Wanda Rutkiewicz, she summits Gasherbrum, 3 in the Karakoram, 7,952 meters. At that time, it is the highest unclimbed peak in the world. For that ascent, Alison receives the British women's altitude record, and she becomes one of the first women to be elected to the Alpine Club. Her husband is Janusz-Onyszkiewicz, a Polish climber and activist who, after the fall of communism, will become Poland's Minister of Defense. Alison holds a firm position. She does not consider an ascent complete if women climb with sherpas and with oxygen. For her, this is not a prejudice or a whim. It is a question of meaning. If a women's team wants to prove itself in the Himalayas, it has to do so in the same style in which the strongest male rope teams work. Vera Watson is a different person, with a different story. She is 46, the oldest active climber on the expedition. Born in 1932 in Dalian into a Russian family. After China, her parents moved to Brazil. Then she ended up in England and finally in the United States. A polyglot, Russian as a mother tongue, plus English, Portuguese, and several other languages. IBM hired her for her Russian for a machine translation project. Then she moved to the research center in San Jose and became part of the System R team, the experimental system that became the world's first relational database. Vera came to the mountains late, after 30. In 1974, she completed the first solo female ascent of Aconcagua. On Annapurna, this is her first 8,000er. In September of 1978, the team sets out on the route, the Dutch Rib. It is a long, rocky ridge, opened by a Dutch expedition 5 years earlier. The route is considered technically demanding. It runs between giant ice walls and is constantly raked by avalanches off the upper slopes. On Annapurna, an avalanche isn't a rare event. It's part of the weather. The camps go up one after another. Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3. Camp 4 is set on a ridge exposed to every wind. Camp 5, at around 7,400 meters, is the launching point for the summit. Avalanches pass dangerously close to the tents. 2 members of the team are injured and head down. Inside the team, there are arguments about pace, about the role of the Sherpas, about who will go to the summit, and in what style. On the 15th of October, the first rope team sets out for the summit. Vera Komarkova, a Czech-American climber, and Irene Miller, an engineer from California, climb with the Sherpas Mingma Tsering and Cheweng Rinjing. They choose the classic style, fixed ropes, oxygen, support. At 15:30 in the afternoon, the rope team is standing on the main summit of Annapurna, 8,091 meters. In that moment, 2 gaps in mountaineering history close at once. It is the first American ascent of Annapurna in the 28 years since routes were opened on the mountain. and it is the first ascent of any 8,000er by women in history. A second inscription has just been added to the slogan on the t-shirts, invisible but heavier than the first. In base camp, they crack open the case of champagne that has been carried halfway across the Himalayas. The radio relays a short phrase: "We made it." The team is in tears, and at that very moment, on the upper part of the mountain, one mind keeps working. The mind of Alison Chadwick-Onyszkiewicz. For Alison, the triumph of the first group is only half the task. The half that, in her own view, belongs to someone else. The ascent was made with sherpas and with oxygen, in classic siege style. For her, raised on the Polish school of mountaineering with its strict aesthetic of clean climbing, a success like that is incomplete. She wants the women to climb Annapurna again, this time without help from sherpas and without oxygen bottles. Only then, by her inner logic, will the slogan on those t-shirts truly be earned. The objective she chooses is ambitious. Not the main summit, where the first rope team has just been, but the central peak of Annapurna, a separate summit in the massif that no one has ever climbed. It would be a first ascent in the purest sense by an all-women team and in pure style, all at once. Her partner becomes Vera Watson. The logic is obvious. At this point, there are not many people on the team capable of going higher. Some of the climbers are exhausted from the ascent and descent. Others are injured by the avalanches on the route. Vera is full of strength. This is her first time at real altitude, but she is 46, and she is not the kind of person to turn down a chance. On the 16th of October, while the first rope team is descending from altitude to base camp, Alison and Vera move upward toward Camp 5. They keep in radio contact with Arlene Blum. The forecast is steady, the weather holds. They are planning a technical climb up the steep ice slope below the central peak, on a line that no one before them has marked out. In base camp, part of the team begins to feel uneasy. The main goal of the expedition has already been met. The slogan has been backed up. Going up for another ascent, for another summit, in pure style, means voluntarily putting on the line what has already been won. But no one tries to stop Alison from her decision. Morning of the 17th of October. The rope team leaves Camp 5 in the direction of the central peak. Above 7,000 meters, the air is so thin that each step takes seconds and each pause takes minutes. Alison leads. Vera goes second. Between them, the rope is taut. The route runs up onto a steep ice slope. About 350 meters below the central peak, there is a section of hard, mirror-like ice that demands precise work with crampons and ice axe. On a slope like that, there is no room for error. Each movement is a separate problem in balance. What exactly happens on that slope next? No one sees. There are no witnesses. According to the most widely accepted reconstruction, pieced together later from the position of the bodies and the marks on the snow, one of the climbers slips and pulls the other along with her. The ice slope offers no chance to stop. The rope team falls together. There is no distress signal on the radio. In base camp, no one knows about it right away. The next day, when the contact is not restored, Arlene Blum sends a search party up, those who still have the strength to climb. It includes Lop Sang, the expedition's Sherpa, and several of the women. The party climbs up to Camp 5 and begins to scan the slope. A few days later, the bodies of the two women are found below the route. They are still tied together by the rope. Alison Chadwick-Onyszkiewicz is 36. Vera Watson is 46. 10 years apart, different biographies, different continents, and one rope, one movement, one fall. Bringing the bodies down off the mountain is impossible. The altitude, the ice, the route, everything is against it. The search party holds a brief farewell right there on the slope, marks the place, and descends. Alison and Vera stay on Annapurna. The summit they were climbing toward is, even today, officially considered one of the hardest in the massif. The expedition comes down to Pokhara with 2 empty sleeping bags and 1 victory. In San Francisco, journalists meet the team. The questions are varied, about the technique of the route, about the Sherpas, about the weather, but behind all of them stands a single one. Was the second rope team, the one that went to the central peak, worth letting go? Arlene Blum will spend 2 years answering that question. In 1980, her book is published, Annapurna, A Woman's Place. She writes it honestly, without heroics, about the arguments inside the team, about fear, about the decisions that had to be made at 7,000 meters. The book becomes a classic of mountaineering literature. It is included on Fortune's list of the 75 smartest business books and on National Geographic's list of the top 100 adventure books. It is read by women who are only just beginning to think about the mountains. In the world of mountaineering, a long conversation goes on about the price of ambition, about whether it was right to go for a second ascent in pure style immediately after the first triumph. That conversation has never closed in anyone's favor. But alongside it, something else is happening. Every women's expedition in the Himalayas that follows, Polish, Japanese, Spanish, American, refers back to Annapurna, 1978. Wanda Rutkiewicz, Alison's closest friend, will later become the first woman on K2. Japanese and Korean climbers will lead their own national teams onto the 8,000ers. The slogan from those t-shirts of 1978 stops being a provocation. It becomes a statistic. Alison Chadwick-Onyszkiewicz and Vera Watson never reached their second summit, but the road they opened for everyone who came after them, after 1978, could no longer be closed. 45 years later, very different women would be climbing the same mountain, and one of them would be sitting in a tent at Camp 4 in April of 2023. Three men are moving up a new line on the south face of Annapurna. One of them carries a name that almost everyone in Korea knows. With him, two teammates and a camera meant for a documentary film. At some point, he picks up the radio, asks one short question over the air, and the rope team vanishes from the mountain for good. After that will come 10 days of searching, 4,000 people at a funeral in Seoul, and a son who, 5 years later, will go looking for his father. In the headset of the radio operator at base camp under Annapurna, static crackles, and through it cuts a short question. The voice is familiar. It belongs to the leader of the team, the man this same operator was sitting in a tent with only the night before. Right now he is somewhere high on the wall, and only one sentence comes through the air. He asks, "How do we get past this?" The operator nods into his headset to confirm he heard and asks him to repeat. But all that comes back is static. Then he tries another frequency, checks the battery, checks the antenna. Everything is working. There is just no one up there answering anymore. He starts calling the trio every 20 minutes. Once, twice, a third time. Up on the mountain, the wind is rising, and back at base camp, it is getting dark. By the time it becomes clear that the link is broken for good, several hours have already gone by. The three men are somewhere above 6,000 meters on a new route up the south face of Annapurna, and they are not coming back on the air. In Korea, almost everyone knows this man. His name is Park Young-seok. He is 47 years old, and for his country, he is more than just a climber. He is a national hero. In the spring of 2005, he became the first person in the world to close out what they call the Explorers Grand Slam, all 14 8,000ers, the highest summit on each of the 7 continents, and both poles of the Earth. Back home, television networks make programs about him. People recognize his face on the street. Now, he is on a mountain again, with a team again. Beside him are 2 men he trusts on this wall more than anyone else, and it is his voice that has just spoken its last sentence over the air. These 2 are also known in Korea, though not as widely as the leader himself. Shin Dong-min is 36 years old. An experienced high-altitude climber, he has been through several hard expeditions with Park Young-seok, and is known as solid and dependable. Kang Ki-seok is 32, the youngest of the 3. A rising star of Korean alpinism, the kind of climber the Federation already sees as the future of the sport. The 3 of them are not a random team. They are a national side, put together for one specific goal. That goal stands in front of them every day from the door of their tent. The south face of Annapurna. 3.5 kilometers of vertical ice and gray rock. One of the hardest faces in the entire Himalaya. Chris Bonington's British team climbed it back in the 70s. And ever since then, expeditions have not always come down off this wall. Its statistics are among the heaviest in the Himalaya. Park Young-seok picks his own line. He aims to the right of the existing routes, into a section no one has ever climbed. The team starts calling that line the Korean route from the very first day. The point is not to reach the summit at any cost. The point is to draw a new road up the wall, to put the country's name on one of the hardest faces in the world. Inside the tents at base camp lies the usual gear for that kind of job. ropes of different lengths, pitons, ice screws, oxygen bottles for the upper section. And one more thing that ordinary expeditions usually do not carry: a camera. Park Young-seok wants Korean climbing to leave behind not only a line on a map, but a film. He wants viewers back home to see this wall the way the three of them see it. So, every day, as long as anyone has the strength, someone in the team is filming. The footage they are shooting cuts off in the middle of the route. On the 17th of October, the rope team leaves the upper camp and steps onto the wall for real. Light gear, minimum weight. They move fast, on a tight schedule. During the day, one of the three picks up the radio and reports to base camp. Altitude, conditions, wind. The voices on the recording sound calm. There is nothing in them to suggest anything is going off plan. By evening, they find a small shelf in the wall and pitch a bivouac. The tent is narrow. The three of them can barely move inside. Below the tent, the wall drops away vertically. Above them rises the gray summit tower. The night is short. In the morning, they clip on their crampons and climb again. On the 18th of October, the rope team keeps going up. Around them, ice, rock, and snow cornices hanging out over empty space. The new section of the route has never been climbed, and every next 10 meters is a decision made on the move. At some point, the path runs into something new. What exactly? No one will ever say now. Maybe it is a crevasse in the ice. Maybe a rock band that could not be seen from below. Maybe a cornice with no support under it. That is the moment when that single sentence comes through the operator's headset. How do we get past this? It is not panic. It is the working question of a climber who has stopped in front of an obstacle and is thinking about how to go around it. In the mountains, that question gets asked hundreds of times in a single expedition. The operator confirms, waits for an answer, a minute, 10, an hour. By the night of the 18th of October, it becomes clear that no one up there is talking anymore. No emergency signals, no call for help. The three men simply disappear in complete silence. That silence on the mountain becomes the only piece of information the rescuers have to work with. The very next day, a helicopter takes off for base camp. The Korean Alpine Federation puts its people in Nepal on alert. Sherpas, rescue teams, and pilots who know this wall are pulled into the operation. In Seoul, no one is sleeping during these days. Every phone call from Nepal is waited for at the receiver. Helicopter after helicopter circles the south face. The pilots are looking for a tent, a patch of fabric, a tiny dot on the ice. At those altitudes, a human being seen from the air looks like a poppy seed on a sheet of white paper. To spot one, you need luck and still air. There is no luck. The wall is being hammered by wind. Visibility comes and goes. The clouds close over the summit tower, open it for a minute, and close it again. Ground teams are working in parallel. They walk to the foot of the wall and search the avalanche cones. In places like that, after a serious collapse, sometimes you find what fell from 1,000 meters. But there, too, there is nothing. No piece of rope, no scrap of fabric, no familiar boot. For 10 days, the operation runs with no result. Every morning, another flyover. Every evening, an empty report. On the 28th of October, the search is officially called off. The Korean Federation issues a statement. The three men are declared missing. The most likely version is a sudden collapse, a rock or an ice cornice. The trio was on a section where that can happen at any moment, and where a person does not even have time to reach for the radio. But that remains a theory. No bodies, no equipment were ever found. No note, no video from the final minutes, no last sentence, except for the one that already came through the air. When there are no more words on the radio and no bodies either, the country decides to say goodbye on its own. In Seoul, they prepare a farewell without the people the farewell is for. They call it a climber's funeral, a hall, a stage, rows of seats. On the morning of the ceremony, people start gathering at the building. First, climbers in their team jackets. Then Federation colleagues, ministry officials, journalists with cameras. Then ordinary people from the street, the ones who had seen this man on television. School children arrive with flowers. When the hall fills up, it turns out there are not enough seats. By the end of the ceremony, more than 4,000 people have gathered in Seoul. That is an enormous number for a farewell to a man whose body never even made it home. On the stage stand, 3 portraits draped in mourning ribbons. Park Young-seok, Shin Dong-min, Kang Ki-seok. Beneath each portrait, fresh flowers. At the foot of the stage, in the front row, among the closest relatives, stands a woman dressed in black. This is Hong Gyung-hee, the wife of Park Young-seok. Beside her stands her son, a small, slightly built young man. You can see in his face that he has not yet fully understood what has happened. After the funeral, Hong Gyung-hee says a few words to the journalists. In her words, there is no reproach, no anger. The meaning of it comes down to one thing. She is, even now, seeing her husband off to the mountains, and she is still waiting for him to come back. The Korean papers print those words. Bloggers and television programs repeat them. In Hong Gyung-hee's home, her husband's things stay where they were. Climbing books, boots in the hallway, maps on the walls, and a son growing up next to an empty place at the table with a single thought, that his father is still somewhere on Annapurna. That thought stays with the son for 5 years. By 2016, he is 22. His name is Park Sung-min. As a child, he was afraid of heights, and his father used to take him into the mountains for that very reason, to make the fear go away. Back then, the boy would cry and refuse to walk. Now he is preparing to go to Annapurna himself. His goal is straightforward, to try to find the remains of his father and his 2 teammates, not to reach the summit, not to repeat the route, just to walk up to the foot of the south face and do what the professionals could not do 5 years before. He prepares for the expedition the way any ordinary young man his age would. He trains on Mount Hala, the highest point on the island of Jeju. He runs long distances, hikes with a heavy pack. Before he leaves, he says a few short words to reporters. "I would like to hold a memorial service for my father." And then he adds, "If I do not find anything, that is all right. My father loved Annapurna." His expedition in 2016 also comes back with nothing. Once again, the wall is circled. Once again, the slope is searched. Once again, nothing is found. And it is not the first attempt either. Back in 2012, a year after the disappearance, the Korean Federation had already sent a search party to Annapurna. That came back empty as well. The mountain has stayed silent ever since, the same way the radio fell silent on the 18th of October. That same year, 2016, in the Sanamdong district of Seoul, a center named after Park Young-seok opens its doors. Children come there to learn to climb on the indoor wall. There is a wall you can climb with a rope, but the real wall has stayed where it was. So, have the 3 men. And the last question that came from that rope team over the air is still hanging there without an answer. Above Camp 4, the wind carries icy grit, and the film camera in the operator's hands gathers a thin crust of frost. On the grainy frame, shot a day before the summit push, you can see 2 figures in woolen balaclavas and old-style down jackets. One is very young. The other has the weathered face of a man who has already seen 3 8,000ers. They are laughing at something the sound never captured. These are the last seconds of footage on which Toshiyuki Kobayashi and Yasuhira Saito are still alive. They have about 72 hours left. The winter expedition of the Gunma branch of the Japanese Alpine Federation arrives at the foot of Annapurna in the autumn of 1987. The leader is Kuniaki Yagihara. The climbing leader is Noboru Yamada, a man for whom an 8,000er in winter has long ceased to be an event. Yamada already has 6 Himalayan summits above 8,000 meters to his name, and in Japan he is called the foremost high-altitude climber of his generation. He brings a team of 14 Japanese and 14 sherpas. No oxygen, no concessions to the mountain. It is a matter of principle. By 1987, oxygen bottles on the 8,000ers are already the norm, but the Gunma team wants to honor the philosophy of pure ascent that the Poles and the Austrians had begun a decade earlier. The chosen route is the hardest one available. The south face of Annapurna, in winter no one has ever climbed it. There is a man on the team who seems made for such a wall, Yasuhira Saito. A little over 30, quiet, enduring. In 1982, he made the first ascent of the Pear Buttress on the north face of Dhaulagiri. In December of 1985, he and Yamada, just the 2 of them, without Sherpas and without oxygen, climbed Manaslu in winter in pure alpine style. It counted as the second winter ascent of Manaslu in history. Saito knows how to move on big winter walls the way few people do. In Japan, he is respected as the ideal high-altitude partner for a 2-man team. No noise, no interviews, no ambition to count up 8,000ers. He simply climbs. And there is a second man whom the entire team watches with a particular curiosity, Toshiyuki Kobayashi, 22 years old, the youngest in the team. Kobayashi, while still a student, had already made it to the summit of Everest by the South Col, very young, as part of a Japanese expedition. On Annapurna, it is his first wall of this caliber, but Yamada places him in the upper rope team, young, light, fast. The ideal partner for the final push. Those who worked with Kobayashi on Everest all say the same thing about him. Calm, unhurried, moving through acclimatization, as steady as a machine. At 22, he already has more high-altitude experience than many guides 10 years older. By the middle of December, 4 high camps stand on the south face. The route follows almost exactly the Bonington line, with a small detour in the lower section. Stone and ice break loose nearly every day. Camp 3 at 6,200 meters has to be moved twice. Avalanches and rockfall destroy the tents. 1 Japanese climber and 1 Sherpa are injured by falling ice. The Sherpa Furba Charing falls into a crevasse near Camp 3 and injures his back. 2 members of the team, Watanabe and Imada, suffer serious frostbite to their toes, the consequences of which they will be treating only after returning home. Despite all this, the team keeps moving upward. By the 20th of December, Camp 4 stands at 7,400 meters at the foot of the rock band beneath the summit. There are 4 people in the tent: Yamada, Saito, Kobayashi, and Teruo Sayagusa. Below, in Camp 3, Base Camp listens in by radio. Their radios are heavy, analog, with short transmission windows. The batteries die in minutes in the cold. There are no satellite phones in 1987. Communication with the world goes down a chain. Camp 4 to Camp 3, Camp 3 to Base Camp to the village of Pokhara, Pokhara to a post office in Japan. To pass a single sentence from a tent at 7,500 meters to Tokyo takes up to a week. At 3:40 in the morning, on the 20th of December, the 4 men step out of the tent. The temperature is around minus 35 degrees Celsius. Above the ridge stands a clear winter night. No sound, no wind. By 9 in the morning, they reach what is called the Lesser Rock Band. Beyond it begins the slow, exhausting climbing on iced-over slabs. By noon, they are already on the snowfields beneath the summit rock wall. The climb up the wall itself takes about 2 hours. At 15:15, all 4 stand on the summit. They shoot a short clip with the video camera, heavy, awkward, in mittens. It is the first winter ascent of Annapurna by the south face and the first time Japanese climbers have set foot on this mountain in winter. Yamada will later recall that they barely spoke, too tired and too cold to celebrate. A winter day in the Himalayas is short, about 6.5 hours of light. When they turn down, the sun is already leaning toward the ridge, and the summit slabs begin to glow with that particular reddish gray, after which darkness comes within 20 minutes. At 1600, the descent begins. Kobayashi goes first. They have just ascended the steepest part of the rock wall, and ahead lies a snow cornice that separates the summit ridge from the upper part of the route. An hour after the start of the descent, around 5 in the evening, Yamada turns around and does not see Kobayashi. On the snow at the edge of the ridge, there is a telltale mark, as if a man had stepped wrong and broken through the lip of the cornice. Yamada will later say it briefly. He probably stepped onto the cornice and went through. The altitude is about 7,900 meters. The south face beneath this section drops away almost vertically. Down below, no one yet knows anything. 22 years old, Everest, climbed almost as a teenager, and the second in which a snow cornice decides everything. Yamada, Saito, and Sayagusa continue the descent as 3. At 5:30, they reach the top anchor of the fixed ropes. Going down on rope is easier, and Camp 4 is not far now. By 7 in the evening, they are already in darkness. Headlamps catch narrow patches of ice. The tent is somewhere between 20 and 40 meters away, depending on whose estimate you take. Saito is in front. Yamada moves right behind him. And suddenly, Saito speaks a short phrase. In the expedition report, it has been preserved in a single form. What the... In the middle of the word, Saito is gone. In the dark, Yamada sees only a brief flash. Saito's crampons scrape against the rock, and from the strike of metal on stone, sparks fly up into the air. A moment later, even those are no longer visible. The altitude is about 7,420 meters, less than 20 meters from the tent. Yasuhira Saito, the man who climbed Winter Manaslu in alpine style with Yamada as a pair, remains somewhere on the south face. Yamada and Saigusa reach the tent alone. They spend that night without sleep. In the tent at 7,400, there are 2 men and 2 empty sleeping systems beside them. Over the radio, a short sentence is sent down to Camp 3. Yamada's voice, as Saigusa remembers it, is even, without intonation. Down below, they receive it and at first ask him to repeat. It is too impossible to take in at once. On the morning of the 21st of December, a longer message reaches base camp by radio. Yasuhira takes it in silence. On the wall below Camp 4, only their own tracks and shreds of old fixed ropes can be seen. Neither Kobayashi nor Saito is anywhere on the route. Yamada and Saigusa descend. They move slowly. Every loose stone in the gully sounds to them like the very sound they will never hear again. On the 27th of December, a search helicopter circles over the south face of Annapurna. At that altitude, the machine is operating at its limit. The pilot can see a steep rock slab, ice cliffs, dark patches of stone under the snow. Nothing that resembles a down jacket or a piece of gear. The search lasts several hours. In the report, a single short line appears. Not found. The bodies of Kobayashi and Saito were never recovered. Their gear remained on the wall as well, somewhere beneath the upper rock band, in the lower gullies, in the crevasses of the glacier, onto which all the avalanches of the south face flow down. The Japanese side wound up the expedition immediately after the 20th of December. After their ascent, no one has climbed Annapurna in winter again. To this day. In the archive of the Japanese Alpine Club, a reel of film survives, shot during that expedition. There is a frame in which Kobayashi is tying the laces of his high-altitude boots at the entrance of the tent at Camp 4. The camera trembles in the wind. Kobayashi lifts his head, looks somewhere into the lens, and smiles. The shot lasts a couple of seconds, and then the film breaks off. He is 22, and one night remains before the summit push. The story of the 2 Japanese climbers who vanished on the descent from Winter Annapurna is written up dryly in the Himalayan chronicles. A name, a year, an altitude, the phrase fell on the descent. No details, no photographs from a funeral, no crowded ceremonies. In 1987, there were no live broadcasts from base camp, no way to call home from the slope. The families of Kobayashi and Saito learned of what had happened only several days later. A telegram from Pokhara, then a letter. Then the silence of an expedition that had returned. The footage from the climb was developed in Tokyo only in January. Among it was the reel from the summit, 2 minutes of filming in mittens, a torn picture, wind on the microphone. That recording was not shown publicly for a long time. This story has a quiet continuation, one that is known in Japan and almost nowhere else. 2 of the men who came back to Camp 4 alive on the 20th of December, 1987, Noboru Yamada and Teruo Saigusa, would be gone together 14 months later. In February of 1989, Yamada led a small Japanese team onto Winter Denali. On the descent from Denali Pass, they were caught by one of those winds that in Alaska are called unpredictable. Yamada, Saigusa, and a 3rd climber, Kozo Komatsu, were spotted by search planes in March below the pass. There had been no chance of surviving such a wind on an open slope. Of the 4 who stood on the summit of Annapurna in December of 1987, 2 years later, not one would remain. Almost 40 years have passed. Climbers on Annapurna today have satellite communication, light membrane clothing, weather forecasts by the hour, and helicopters capable of flying at 8,000 meters. Kobayashi and Saito had none of that. They had a film camera, a heavy radio, a woolen balaclava, and a clear winter night above the south face. They walked out at 3:40 in the morning at -35. To the summit they climbed. From the summit, one after the other, they did not return. And the south face of Annapurna in winter remains exactly what it was then. 1.5 kilometers of vertical ice, waiting. Darkness, ice on both sides of his face, a cold so deep it no longer registers as cold because the body has stopped fighting it. Somewhere far above, Dozens of meters overhead, a narrow slit in the snow lets in a faint hint of daylight. At the bottom of this frozen funnel, twisted into the position the body locked itself into on impact, lies a man. He doesn't move. He doesn't answer. For 3 days now. Outside, on the surface, he has already been written off as dead. Down at base camp, his personal belongings have been gathered. His wife and his brother have been told there will be no miracle. On the mountain, people have looked away. No one falls into a crevasse on Annapurna at that depth and comes back. That is the unwritten rule no one debates, because to debate it is to give other people false hope. The rescue operation has been formally closed. No one is trying to bring him up from down there anymore. And that, in essence, is how most of these stories on the 8,000ers end. And then, suddenly somewhere up at the lip of the crevasse, a light appears. First a glow, then a beam, then a voice. A rope drops down into the slit. A man descends along it, a man who does not know what he is about to find at the bottom, a cold reminder of failure, or a living human being who can still be dragged out into rescue. The one lying at the bottom is named Anurag Maloo, 34 years old, an Indian from the city of Kishangarh in Rajasthan. And what you are about to hear is a story that even the people who saw it with their own eyes refuse to fully believe. Annapurna is the 10th highest peak on the planet, 8,091 meters. But it isn't the height that makes it terrifying. Annapurna has the worst death rate of any 8,000er on Earth. In the first decades of its history, roughly 1 in 3 climbers who set foot on it never came back. The silvery southern face you can see from the tourist viewpoints in Pokhara is, in reality, an avalanche trap. The snow here gives way without warning. The route runs beneath ice seracs that can collapse at any moment. And although commercial expeditions and fixed ropes have improved the numbers somewhat in the modern era, the mountain still takes what it wants. In the spring of 2023, an unusually large crowd gathers below Annapurna. The season is busy. Dozens of climbers from around the world. Indian sport mountaineers, Pakistani stars, European professionals, Asian teams. Different parties are working the mountain at the same time. Each has its own plan, its own schedule, its own roster. Maloo has come as part of an Indian expedition serviced by the Nepalese agency Pioneer Adventure. In the same group are the well-known Indian climber Baljit Kaur and the seasoned high-altitude veteran Arjun Vajpayee. Anurag Maloo himself is an unusual figure for a big mountain. An engineer by training, a manager in an international startup network by profession, a public-facing activist by calling. He calls himself a mountainpreneur, an entrepreneur of the mountains. He is 34, and he has already climbed several 6,000ers and 7,000ers in the Himalayas. Amadablam, Noon, Imjatse. He uses his expeditions as a tool. He raises money and attention for sustainable development, for the United Nations goals, for educational programs in Indian villages. Annapurna was meant to be his first 8,000er, and the first step toward a personal program of 14 8,000ers plus the 7 highest summits of the continents. The climb does not come easily for the Pioneer Adventure team. The weather on Annapurna is moody this season. The window for a final summit push keeps narrowing. Part of the team turns back already on the approach. Baljit Kaur does reach the summit, but on the descent, her condition deteriorates. She has to be airlifted off the mountain from above 7,000 meters. Other members suffer from altitude sickness, hypothermia, sheer exhaustion. Maloo turns back before reaching the top. He begins his descent from the area of Camp 3 at around 6,000 meters. By Himalayan standards, this is the calmer part of the route. Between Camp 3 and Camp 2, there are fixed ropes in place. Nothing is supposed to happen here. What happens next was later reconstructed from the accounts of the Sherpas. According to them, Maloo, on his way down, clipped into the wrong rope. On a steep ice section, there can be several such ropes. Old ones, new ones, leftovers from earlier expeditions. The one he attached his carabiner to was poorly anchored. He fell. He slid about 15 meters down the icy slope, slamming against the bluish surface. And then he vanished. He dropped into a black hole, a crevasse in the glacier whose edge had been masked by fresh snow. The Sherpas saw the moment he fell. They went up to the lip and shone their lamps down. They could not see the bottom. By various estimates, the crevasse opened up below into darkness reaching 50 meters, 70 meters, by some accounts, almost 300 meters. Shouting into that abyss was pointless. To go down without specialized equipment, without long ropes, without a prepared team, that meant almost certainly not coming back. The Sherpas marked the coordinates, fixed the location, descended to base camp, and reported a member had fallen into a crevasse, no signs of life. From there, the usual logic of the big mountain takes over. The agency contacts the family. The family is told plainly, in our experience, there is no chance. To pull him out from that depth is a separate, extraordinarily complex operation, and no one is going to organize that this season. Maloo is added to the list of those who have died on the mountain. In India, he is already being publicly mourned. The news goes out to the Indian press. A young climber from Rajasthan, the hope of a new generation, has perished on Annapurna. The Ministry of External Affairs releases a statement. Social media fills with condolences. His brother and his wife sit by a phone in Delhi, to which good news is no longer supposed to come. And yet, into this familiar logic of the big mountain, a crack opens. The family refuses to accept the word dead as final. Maloo's brother insists, until it is visually confirmed, until somebody actually goes down and sees, the word is missing, not dead. He starts calling everyone who can do something. His pleas reach the rescue teams working in the region at that moment. This is where the story should have ended, but two Poles step into it. Adam Bilecki and Mariusz Hatala are on Dhaulagiri, the neighboring mountain across the valley. When they hear what has happened, they make a decision that defies common sense. They abandon their own expedition and fly to Annapurna. The same Adam Bilecki who, 5 years earlier, descended Nanga Parbat alone to dying Elizabeth Revel, lifting her out in one of the most legendary rescues in Himalayan history. The man who pulled off the impossible back then is now expected to do it again. A team of Nepalese Sherpas joins them. Chepal, Lakpa Nurbu, Dawa Nurbu, Lakpa, Tashi. The operation is coordinated from base camp by Chong Dawa Sherpa. The helicopter pilot Sobit Gauchan delivers them onto the mountain on a long line, a technique in which a person hangs beneath the helicopter like a pendant, and the pilot lowers him directly onto the precise point of the route. It is dangerous in itself. At high altitude, the helicopter is buffeted by every gust of wind, but there is no other way to buy time. By now, almost 3 days have passed since Maloo dropped into the crevasse. Inside the glacier, the temperature stays at around -20, sometimes lower. No water, no food. Locked in the contorted position the impact left him in. Any survival instructor will tell you that a human being in such conditions does not last more than a few hours. Bilecki and Hatala know this too. They go up understanding that what they will almost certainly bring out is not a man, but a memory of one. When they reach the lip of the crevasse, they anchor their ropes. Bilecki begins his descent. On a 70-meter rope, he sinks gradually into the darkness, lighting the space with his headlamp. The ice around him narrows, then widens again. Somewhere, at around 50 meters down, in a cocoon of broken snow and ice, the beam catches a silhouette. A man lies on his side, as if asleep. Bilecki moves closer. Outwardly, no signs of life. The face frostbitten. The limbs motionless. Bilecki carefully clears the snow around the face to free the airway and to make sure nothing snags on rock outcrops during the haul up. And in that very moment, leaning over the face, he notices something. The chest is moving, just barely, very faintly, very rarely, but it is moving. Maloo is breathing. Bilecki calls down Tashi Sherpa. Together they gently free Maloo from under the mass of snow, secure him in a specialized harness, and begin the lift. The hoist takes more than an hour. Every pull on the rope has to be timed so that nothing damages the spine, nothing catches on protrusions of ice, nothing drops the load. When Maloo is finally raised onto the surface of the glacier, he is immediately clipped into the helicopter's long-line system. In less than an hour, the pilot lands the machine beside Manipal Hospital in Pokhara. Here, Maloo formally slips away again. His condition turns critical. Doctors begin resuscitation efforts, 4 straight hours of trying to bring him back. By protocol, resuscitation is usually called off long before that. But Maloo's brother, who has by then made it to the hospital, demands they keep going, and his body comes back to life. For 12 days, Maloo lies in a coma, first in Pokhara, then in Kathmandu, then he is transferred to Delhi. A charitable flight is arranged to move him to the Apex Trauma Center at AIIMS, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. The list of injuries the doctors compile reads like an encyclopedia of high-altitude trauma. Severe frostbite on both hands. Deep cold injury to the fingers and to the toes. Vascular damage. Acute kidney failure. Complications in the lungs. Infected skin areas. 200 days of struggle. 9 reconstructive surgeries. A significant portion of his skin is rebuilt through grafts. Maloo loses the tips of the fingers on his right hand. He learns to stand again. He learns to walk again. The muscle memory of his legs has been erased by the long coma, and his body has to be taught how to move from scratch, like a child. At the end of October, he is discharged from AIIMS. He walks out through the hospital doors on his own 2 feet, leaning on a cane, surrounded by the same doctors who, only months earlier, did not believe this patient would ever open his eyes. A year after the tragedy, Maloo says it publicly. He is going back to the mountains. Not to an 8,000er, not yet. First training 6,000ers, rehabilitation, rebuilding skills. But he is going. They called him the child of Annapurna, the mountain that gave him back. It is the most improbable ending the peak has ever handed to the world. And yet, in that same season, on that same mountain, not every story closed so kindly. Somewhere higher up, in a tent, in those very same days, the silence settled differently. When members of the Polish expedition come down from the mountain to base camp at the foot of the south face of Annapurna, Gabriel Denamur's tent stands untouched. The sleeping bag inside is folded. A cup of dried tea sits beside the stove. His clothes hang on the guy lines. His diary lies near the head of the bed. Only Denamur himself is missing. He hasn't come back from the mountain in several days. The team is preparing to break camp. The autumn season of 1991 is coming to an end, and nights down below are becoming almost as cold as those high above. The Belgian climber has vanished somewhere above Camp 3, between 7,500 meters and the summit. And this isn't one of those stories with a final radio call, with last words, with a clear ending. This is a story about silence, about a man who went up and never came back, and who is still up there to this day. Gabriel Denamur was Belgian, not French, as short notes often claim. He came from a small circle of Belgian high-altitude climbers in the early 90s, little known beyond their own country, but seasoned and serious. The era around him was the gold of the Polish school and the rise of French solo alpinism. Working in the Himalaya were Erhard Loretan, Pierre Béguin, Christophe Profit, Eric Escoffier, each planting his own flag on speed solo ascents. The idea was simple and merciless. One person, minimum gear, maximum speed. What used to be done by huge siege expeditions was now being done by pairs and solo climbers in a matter of days. For this generation, Annapurna was the proving ground, the mountain with the highest fatality rate among the 8,000ers, with walls that rewrite alpine history. Those who pass it in the new style end up in the textbooks. Those who get it wrong end up on the lists of the missing. Denamur went without oxygen, without sherpas, in a small group. That was his choice and his style. From Belgium that season, there was one more name on the mountain. Ingrid Bayens, an experienced high-altitude climber working with the same international team. Denamur's own biography has barely survived in open sources. The exact circumstances of his path into the mountains, his earlier ascents, his age, are recorded only in scattered fragments. What is certain is that he was considered a strong, dependable partner, and he wasn't going to Annapurna as a tourist. Denamur joined an international expedition led by the Polish climber Mieczysław Jarosz. At the same time, on the same mountain, a second larger Polish expedition was at work, led by Krzysztof Wielicki, the man who a few years later would close out all 14 8,000ers on the planet. Wielicki's team that season included Wanda Rutkiewicz, Bogdan Stefko, Ryszard Pawłowski, Mariusz Spruta. It was a dense lineup. 24 serious climbers from different countries were working on the mountain at the same time. The route was the Bonington Line on the south face of Annapurna. The style of climbing was light and fast, without large siege camps, as had been customary 2 decades earlier. Denamur's rope partner was the Pole Kazimierz Stępień. Both went without oxygen. It was both a challenge to the era and a risk that, in case of a mistake, leaves no right to a second attempt. At 7,500 meters without oxygen, every decision becomes slower, and every mistake becomes more expensive. By October 19th, they reached Camp 3 at an altitude of around 7,300 meters. This was the last platform before the summit ridge. The plan was simple and ambitious. The rope team would push to the top as a pair, with no support from above. On the morning of October 19th, they set out for the summit attempt. The weather was unstable, the wind on the ridge stronger than expected. They climbed a few hundred meters and turned back. They returned to the Camp 3 tent without losing altitude, but exhausted. The decision was to repeat the attempt the next morning. There was an agreement between them to go together. At that altitude, a rope team isn't insurance against a fall. It's insurance against a mistake in the head. At 7,500 meters, a person starts thinking more slowly. One partner notices what the other doesn't. Morning of October 20th. The temperature near Camp 3 was around -20. Denamur was ready to set out earlier than Stempien. For reasons that were never fully explained, the pole was delayed. He would only head up around noon. Denamur did not wait. At dawn, he set out alone. That decision changed everything. Instead of a rope team on the 800-meter vertical drop to the summit, a soloist. No tent above Camp 3, no bivouac gear, no partner. The snow on the ridge was deep. There were no tracks. He was breaking trail himself. This was the last time his expedition mates saw Denamur alive. That same day, Krzysztof Wilicki, with the second Polish expedition, was climbing a parallel variation of the route. On the upper slopes, he noticed fresh tracks of a single climber in the snow. The tracks led straight to the summit, and then beyond, across the ridge, onto the north side. That was the opposite direction from the standard descent route. Denamur did indeed reach the summit of Annapurna on October 20th, 1991. This is confirmed by tracks that several people from both expeditions saw. But instead of descending along the line of his ascent, he went north. There are still several theories about why this happened. Possibly poor visibility, and he mistook the north ridge for the south. Possibly a deliberate attempt at a traverse from north to south. A solo that, in that season, would have made him one of the most prominent climbers in the world. Possibly hypoxia and an error in orientation. Wilicki and his team continued their climb and descent. Denamur was nowhere to be seen. By the evening of October 20th, it became clear at base camp. The soloist had gone over the ridge and had not come back. Jarosz tried to reach him several times by radio. Silence. The decision was made not to send a search party. The reasons were complex and, in a sense, pragmatic. Supplies were running out, the season was ending, the window of good weather was closing right before their eyes. To climb from Camp 3 to the ridge and descend the north side in search of one man would, in effect, mean a whole new expedition, for which the team had neither the resources nor the strength. Jarosz hoped that on the north side, Denamur would be met and picked up by another expedition. There were rumors that a Russian team was working on the classic route there. Part of his team was already breaking down base camp on October 20th. Everyone expected that Denamur would come down on his own, that he would walk into one of the villages at the foot, that news would arrive from Kathmandu in a week or two. The news never came, not in a week, not in a month, not in a year. 3 days after the disappearance, on October 23rd, Denamur's compatriot climbed the same wall. Ingrid Byans became the first woman to complete the Bonington route on the south face of Annapurna. It was a triumph for Belgian climbing, and at the same time, a heavy shadow standing right next to it. On one mountain, in 1 week, 2 Belgians, 2 opposite fates. One returned from the summit and entered the history of women's alpinism as a pioneer. The other vanished beyond the ridge and joined the list of those the mountain didn't give back. Byans knew Denamur from the Belgian climbing community. The expeditions had crossed paths at base camp. After her summit, the attention of the press and the federations was focused on her achievement, which is understandable. Her story was concrete and visible. Denamur's disappearance remained in the shadows, with no note, no last signal, no explanation. 12 days after Denamur's disappearance, an unexpected discovery surfaced. The Slovenian climber Slavko Svetičić was making a solo attempt on the west face of Annapurna. He didn't reach the summit. He turned back at 7,900 meters because of frostbite. He descended via the north side. On November 2nd, west of the usual line of the route, he noticed a trail of footprints. These were tracks that had been pressed out by the wind. The snow around them had been blown away, while the prints themselves stood raised above the surface. Sveticich followed them with his eyes. The tracks faded out in a stony field far from any standard line. Whether they belonged to Denamur, no one will ever prove, but the direction and the timing match. This is the last possible sign of the man who went from the summit toward the north. The exact circumstances of what happened between the ridge and the north slope remain unknown to this day. What is certain is that Denamur was on the summit on October 20th, 1991. What is certain is that after the summit, he did not come down by the known route. Without bivouac gear, the first night at that altitude almost never ends in a return. The second, even less so. There were no search expeditions on his trail in 1991, or in the years that followed. On Annapurna, searches for a missing climber at 8,000-meter altitudes are essentially impossible. It isn't the kind of logistics in which someone can simply be brought back. The north side of Annapurna is an almost deserted slope. Routes go up there once every few years, and everyone who climbs there is going for their own summit, not to scout for someone else's tracks. Denamur's name was entered into the Himalayan database as missing in the autumn season of 1991. The American Alpine Journal published a short note in 1992, a few paragraphs in the season's review. In Belgium, he is remembered by a narrow circle: comrades, family, his climbing club. The mountain itself covers his tracks with new snow every season. More than 30 years have passed since then. Somewhere between the summit ridge of Annapurna and its north slope, at the altitude he wanted to reach, a Belgian climber named Gabriel Denamur remains. The snow buried his tracks that very night. No one will ever know what happened in those October days of 1991. Which step was wrong, which way he was looking in his last minutes, what he managed to see from the summit. This is a story without a note, without a last word, without a helicopter and rescuers. Only a name on the list of those Annapurna did not give back. 13 of the 14 8,000ers on the planet, already behind him, one mountain still ahead. He would have been the sixth person in history to climb all 14 without supplemental oxygen. Christian Kuntner is sitting at the Annapurna base camp, waiting for a weather window to his final summit. On the same mountain, in the same week of May 2005, the American Edvia Sturs has already gone up and closed his own 14. 6 days after his triumph, at 5,500 meters above the trail to Camp 2, an ice wall begins to move. The serac will pick out a single person from a group spread along the slope, and that person turns out to be the very man who has only one mountain left. Christian Kuntner comes into the world on January 15, 1962, in the small town of Prad at the foot of the Stelvio Pass. This is South Tyrol, the northernmost edge of Italy, a German-speaking region that for decades has supplied Europe's finest high-altitude climbers to the Himalayas. From this same South Tyrol came Reinhold Messner, the first man on all 14 8,000ers. Kuntner grows up in the same frame of reference, where mountains are not an adventure but part of everyday life. He finishes school in Bolzano with a degree in mechanical engineering, but he doesn't stay in offices and chooses the freelance life. He doesn't fit into the big clubs, doesn't chase sponsorship contracts, and rarely gives interviews. Within the climbing community, he is known as quiet, stubborn, and very methodical. When asked about his motives, he answers with a short phrase: "I go to the mountains for myself. I have nothing to prove to anyone." With that kind of character, he chooses the longest and toughest collection in high-altitude mountaineering, 14 summits above 8,000 meters without supplemental oxygen. That decision puts him on the same road as Messner. Only unlike Messner, Kuntner will encounter one small barrier on this road, the place where everything will end. That barrier is still far away, and no one is thinking about it yet. In 1991, Kuntner climbs his first 8,000er, Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world, 8,188 meters. On the same expedition is Wanda Rutkiewicz, the legend of Polish women's mountaineering. For the 29-year-old Kuntner, this is the entrance to the top tier of the global high-altitude scene, and right from the start, he's working alongside a major name. He climbs Cho Oyu without supplemental oxygen. That becomes his rule, and he never deviates from it again. A year later, Wanda Rutkiewicz heads up alone on Kangchenjunga and never returns. Her disappearance becomes one of the most famous mysteries of the Himalayas in the 90s, and for Kuntner, it's a first lesson about the price of the 14 Summits collection. He doesn't turn back. In 1994, he summits Dhaulagiri, the 8th highest mountain in the world. From this point on, he keeps his own internal tally. 2 of 14, 12 to go. He doesn't announce the goal openly, but in Italian climbing circles, people know about it. Kuntner climbs as if no one is watching him, and that's exactly why his ascents grow longer in the list and shorter in the newspaper columns. His name in the wider world doesn't grow much, but a permanent partnership starts to form. At the turn of the 90s and the 2000s, Kuntner finds his climbing partner, Abel Blanc from Aosta. Blanc is just as quiet an Italian high-altitude climber, just as stubborn a collector of the 14, just as committed to climbing without oxygen. They match each other in pace and in their relationship to risk. The most famous of their joint summits is Nanga Parbat. On June 30th, 2001, Kuntner, Blanc, and Stefan Andres reach 8,125 meters. This is not just another 8,000er, this is a mountain with a heavy history. It was here in 1970 that Messner's brother died. The trio climbs it without fanfare. The Italian climbing publications of that period mention Kuntner dryly, a name on the general list with no epithets attached. This isn't disrespect, it's his own choice of style. He works like a craftsman, not like a star. By the early 2000s, the quiet Tyrolean and his partner from Aosta have become one of the most consistent pairs in the Himalayas. By the spring of 2004, this consistency produces its main result. On May 15, 2004, Christian Kuntner stands on the summit of Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain on the planet, 8,516 meters, still without bottled oxygen, still without a noisy support team. But this summit is special. It's his 13th. Out of the 14 8,000ers, he has one left. If he closes the 14th, he'll join a very short list of people who have climbed all 14 without supplemental oxygen. At that moment, fewer than 10 in the world. Kuntner is 42, which by high-altitude standards is the prime age. He's in the form of his life. The mountain that remains for him is no mystery. He knows it by sight. He knows its base camp, knows its glacier, knows its seracs. It's Annapurna, the very first of the 8,000ers by date of first ascent, and the first of them by death rate. Kuntner has already tried it, more than once, and every time the mountain has sent him back. By the spring of 2004, descending from Lhotse, he understands. The 14th will be this one, and it will be harder than anything that came before. The internal arithmetic is simple. 13 done, 1 to go. And that one turns out to be precisely the one that costs more than all the previous 12 combined. That one mountain is a statistical monster among the 8,000ers. Annapurna is the deadliest of the 14. By 2005, its ratio of deaths to successful summits is worse than that of K2, roughly 1 to 3. The main threat here is not the thin air at the top, not the final ridge. The main threat is the lower part of the route. A massive ice wall hangs over the glacier and over the trail to Camp 2. Ice blocks, seracs, are constantly breaking off it. They fly down a chute that every expedition has to use. Kuntner knows this section not from articles. In 2002, he comes to Annapurna for the first time for his 14th and turns back. In 2003, he returns, tries the south route, climbs rope to Blanc, and again retreats. Between 2003 and 2005, he makes another attempt and again leaves without the summit. These are no longer just failures. This is an emerging reputation that the mountain has built up against him personally. By 2005, Kuntner understands he can't keep stretching this out forever. If the 14th doesn't close this season, it may never close. He returns for a season that will turn out to be one of the busiest in Annapurna's history. In the team Kuntner is working with, alongside him, are the Italian Silvio Mondinelli, Mario Gobi, Marco Camandona, the Australian Andrew Locke, and 2 Americans from Colorado. Blanc, as usual, is roped together with him. A different team is working on a parallel route. Its leader is Ed Viesturs, the American high-altitude climber, who also has a long-standing project with the same finish line, 14 without oxygen. Viesturs calls it Endeavour 8000, has been pursuing it for 18 years, and Annapurna for him is the last one. He has already turned back twice on this mountain. In 2005, he returns with Vika Gustafsson, his Finnish partner, and with a very sharp sense that he can't wait any longer. On May 12, 2005, Ed Viesturs reaches the summit of Annapurna. It's his last of the 14. He becomes the first American to climb all 14 8,000ers, and the fifth person in history to do it without supplemental oxygen. A project that has been running for almost 2 decades is closed. Down in base camp, Kuntner hears the news on the radio. They're sitting on the same mountain, going for the same 14th. One of them has just claimed it. The other is waiting for his window. That window opens in mid-May. On the 17th, the group of Kuntner and Blanc spends the night at Camp 1, just above 5,000 meters. On May 18th, they set out early. The morning is calm, visibility is good, no wind and no snowfall. The group stretches out along the slope. Blanc is a little ahead. Kuntner is behind him, a few meters back. Further down, at a small vertical gap, come Mondinelli, Gobi, Camandona, Andrew Locke, and the 2 Americans. Around 7:15 in the morning, they are at an altitude of about 5,500 meters, a section just above Camp 1, in the zone beneath the overhanging ice wall. That wall is the very piece of dangerous infrastructure that Annapurna is famous for. Smooth blue seracs press against the slope, hold themselves in unstable balance, and break off from time to time. What exactly triggers it on this particular morning, no one has time to see. Part of the wall starts to move without warning. A large ice block separates and goes down the chute. The ice strikes only one person out of the entire stretched-out group. That person is Christian Kuntner. Blanc, walking literally a few meters ahead, ends up just outside the line of impact. Those who are below are also untouched. The hit lands on one man, the very man with 13 8,000ers behind him and one final summit ahead. The mountain picks him alone. That selectiveness is no reason to sit and watch. Within minutes, Blanc, Mondinelli, Camandona, and the others reach Kuntner. They dig him out of the ice debris and immediately understand that his condition is very serious. The impact was severe, and help is needed at once. At 5,500 meters, that means there's almost no time. By a rare coincidence, on Annapurna that same day there is a doctor specialized in resuscitation. He's working on the mountain with a different expedition, and he happens to be at a distance from which he can come. He descends to the site as quickly as possible. Kuntner is carried to Camp 2, and they begin doing what's possible under the circumstances. But at this altitude, any help has its limits. There is no operating room, no helicopter capable of pulling him quickly off 5,500 meters. On May 18, 2005, on the same day, Christian Kuntner dies. He is 43. A partnership built over many years is broken on the very mountain that was supposed to be the 14th. And right here is where the cruel arithmetic of this whole story plays out. On May 12th, Ed Viesturs closed his 14th and the project of his life. On May 18th, 6 days later, Kuntner did not reach his 14th. The same mountain, the same week, 2 different endings to the same project. One climber closes the work of his life, the other stays on 13 forever. The phrase, "one left," becomes Kuntner's short epitaph. The climbing magazines of that season write about him dryly and quickly. A name, 13, a serac, Annapurna, May 18th. Against the backdrop of his death, the loud story of Ed Viesturs closing his project plays out in parallel. Books, interviews, magazine covers. Kuntner, against this backdrop, is silent twice. In life by his own character, after his death by circumstance. And yet within the climbing community, he is not forgotten. Abele Blanc, his constant partner, does not abandon the project. He takes a break, then returns to the 8,000ers on other peaks, picking up the ones he still needs. Annapurna remains for him the last. In 2009, 4 years after Kuntner's death, Blanc returns to the same mountain. On April 26, 2009, he reaches the summit of Annapurna and closes his 14 8,000ers. On the summit, he has a photograph of Christian Kuntner with him. He holds it up in front of the camera, and that frame becomes one of the most famous images from the entire biography of this partnership. No long speeches, no formal dedications, no loud press release. Just a photograph of a Tyrolean in the snow. Kuntner, formally stopped at 13, ends up on the summit of the 14th all the same, in the hands of a friend. That kind of closure works only inside one specific partnership. The mountain itself, after May 18th, 2005, continues to do exactly what it did before Kuntner. Annapurna does not close itself on a single story. And in each one that follows, the same type of event repeats. The mountain picks out one person from a group spread along the slope. Kuntner of 2005 stands in this long list as one of the most painful entries. The number 13 out of 14 is perhaps the shortest and the cruelest phrase you can use to describe high-altitude mountaineering. Via Stores closed the project on May 12th. Kuntner came up 6 days short. The same slope of the same mountain in the same week turns into two different endings. That is Annapurna's signature logic. It does not pick out the weak. It stops those who have almost made it, and it does so at the very moment when the climber is already mentally standing on the summit. April 28, 2010, the slope of Annapurna, around 7,500 meters. Inside a tiny tent, half buried in snow, a man is lying down. Beside him, his back pressed against the wall, sits a Sherpa. Outside, a blizzard, no visibility for even a single step. Somewhere lower, in Camp 4, the legendary Basque climber Juanito Oyarzabal catches a hoarse voice on the radio. The voice belongs to a man from Mallorca, and within an hour the phrase he speaks will fly across the Spanish internet and land in every newspaper in the country. In Catalan, calmly and terribly at the same time, "Por mis hijos, bajadme de aquí." For my children, take me down from here. On the other end of the line, a man with 13 8,000ers behind him stays silent. He stays silent because he doesn't know what to answer. Down below, in base camp, they are already searching for a helicopter and Sherpas. The neighboring expedition, just a few hundred meters lower, has refused to help. And up there, in a tent on the slope, the man named Tolo Calafat has less than a day left to live. And no one is coming. And no one is coming. To understand how he ended up there, we have to go back 40 years to an island in the western Mediterranean. Bartolomé Tolo Calafat Marquez was born in 1970 in Palma de Mallorca, into a family far removed from big mountains. By training a telecommunications engineer, by character methodical, calm, without that reckless bravado that usually shadows talk of the Himalayas. First came track and field, then triathlon. In the 2000s, he became one of the people who launched skyrunning in the Balearics, mountain races along trails and ridges. Nobody from Mallorca, generally speaking, went to the 8,000ers. Until him. In 2006, together with his fellow islander Juan Antonio Olivieri, Calafat climbed Everest. They became the first residents of the Balearic Islands to stand on the summit of the highest mountain on the planet. After Everest came Cho Oyu, Shishapangma, Broad Peak. By the spring of 2010, Annapurna was supposed to be his fifth 8,000er. Back home, he had a wife and 2 small children. The invitation to Annapurna didn't come from a tour operator. The man who called him along was Juanito Oyarzabal himself, a Basque legend, a man who by that point had already collected 13 of the 14 summits. Calafat wasn't going as a client. He was going as a partner. He wasn't going as a client. He was going as a partner. The team was strong and experienced. Besides Oyarzabal and Calafat, there was Carlos Pauner from Zaragoza, one of the best Spanish high-altitude climbers of his generation, and the Romanian Horia Colibușanu, a man known for taking part 2 years earlier on this very same Annapurna in the attempt to save the dying Iñaki Ochoa de Olza. 4 climbers with serious altitude experience, no beginners, no tourists with guides. On the same mountain, in those same days, slightly off to the side, another expedition was working, a big, noisy one, with dozens of Sherpas and the press. It was led by the 44-year-old Korean Oh Yoon-soon, and for her, Annapurna was the last 8,000er. If she made it up, she would become the first woman in history to close out all 14. The budget of her expedition, according to the Spaniards, exceeded 5 million euros. She had the best gear, the best Sherpas, and her own schedule for the summit push. On April 27, 2010, at 16:15 Nepali time, the 4 Spaniards and Oh Yun-soon's group stood on the summit of Annapurna. The Korean descended first, with her Sherpas and her $1 million contract. The Spaniards lingered longer. They would have to begin their descent in the dark, on wet fixed lines, with oxygen running low after a long day and strength stretched to the limit. At that point, no one yet understood that a blizzard was already rolling in from above. Night, wind, temperature far below -30. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Calafat was bringing up the rear. By midnight, it became clear that he was lagging behind. Not by 20 minutes, not by half an hour. He simply stopped moving forward. At around 7,500 meters, his strength gave out completely. He developed the most severe form of altitude sickness. Consciousness began to slip away. His body stopped obeying him. Oyarzabal and Polner tried to drag him by the arms, but at that altitude it was impossible. The decision was collective and terrible. They would go down to Camp 4, would try to drag at least themselves there. With Calafat would remain his Sherpa, named Dawa. The plan was to wait out the worst hours in a small assault tent, and in the morning, try to lower Tolo on a rope. On the morning of April 28th, Dawa came on the air. His voice was steady, but the phrase wasn't any easier for it. Tolo can't move. Calafat would not stand up. He was barely speaking. Down below, in base camp, they began running through every option. All of them ran into one word: Sherpas. They had no free ones of their own. The most workable plan was to ask for help from the neighboring Korean expedition, which was standing right next door. According to the Spanish team, Oyarzabal contacted Oh Yun-soon's camp personally. He knew that the Korean had several Sherpas in Camp 3 who hadn't gone anywhere that day and had kept their strength. He wasn't asking for her own exhausted guides. He was asking her to send up the rested ones. According to the Spanish press, he offered 6,000 euros. A few hours later, the answer came back. It was a refusal. The Sherpas were busy, the expedition was packing up, and the Korean had a triumphant press conference about her 14th 8,000er waiting ahead of her. She needed to get down to Kathmandu, to the cameras and microphones. In parallel, a second grievance surfaced. Carlos Pauner would later tell journalists a detail that in Spain provoked particular outrage. According to him, on the very uppermost section of the route, Oh Yun-soon's team had fixed 50 to 60 meters of rope to get up the steep stretch to the summit. And they took it down, according to the Spaniards, exactly when Calafat's group was still going up that section. Coming down without that rope in a blizzard, in the dark, with strength fading, that's a completely different story. None of the Spaniards knew this at the time, but it was precisely the absence of those meters of rope that may have turned a hard descent into a fatal one. Beside Tolo in the tent remained the Sherpa Dawa. But in terms of help from outside, he was alone, in that strange geometry where someone else's camp is right there, but help from it does not come. In that strange geometry where someone else's camp is right there, but help from it does not come. He stayed in the tent for a second day. The Sherpa Dawa tried to move, went outside, looked for a possible route down, came back. His strength was running out too. Down below, they requested the only thing that could still work at that altitude, a B-3 helicopter, a special high-altitude machine. The Spanish doctor and climber, Jorge Egocheaga, flew in to help. The weather kept the helicopter on the ground for almost the entire day. It couldn't climb above 6,500 meters, and below 7.5 Calafat had no chance of getting down on his own. Contact with Tolo came and went. In the radio sessions he spoke briefly. He said he was freezing, that there was a lot of snow around him, and again, as if it were the only thing he could remember, he asked, "Where is the Sherpa?" The Sherpa was sitting in the same tent, 1.5 meters away from him, and he couldn't answer in a way that Tolo would understand. His consciousness was already mixing reality with fragments of something from home, from Majorca, something warm. On the evening of April 28th, around 9 local time, he was heard for the last time. His voice was very thin. He reported calmly, like a weather bulletin, that the snow was beginning to cover the tent, and that was it. The radio link stayed open for some time after that. But from the other side, no one spoke again. The radio link stayed open for some time after that. But from the other side, no one spoke again. The night passed in silence. On the morning of April 29th, Calafat did not respond. Not on the radio, not on the satellite phone. The weather opened up a little, and the helicopter finally went up. The pilot and Igochiaga reached around 7,100 meters, a record for a rescue operation on Annapurna at that point. They scanned the slope for the tent. The tent could no longer be seen. The snow had leveled the slope overnight, and the spot where Tolo and the Sherpa had been sitting had vanished under a smooth white field. After 12 hours of searching, the Sherpa Dawa found no trace of his partner and began his own descent. Around midday local time, Juanito Oyarzabal came on the air from Camp 4 and confirmed what everyone already understood. Tolo was gone. Carlos Pauner was evacuated down with severe frostbite of the hands and feet. Kolibashanu and Oyarzabal were taken off the slope on the next flights of the same B-3 helicopter. On Majorca, Tolo's wife and 2 small children were waiting. On Annapurna, at around 7,400 meters beneath the snow, he himself remained. Bringing him down from there is impossible. That spot became his last point on the map, and at that moment, the story was only just beginning. Because in Spain, the microphones were already switching on. A few hours after the news of his death, Juanito Oyarzabal gave an interview to the newspaper Ultima Hora. He didn't measure his words. He said that solidarity in modern alpinism had vanished, that the Korean woman, with her €5 million budget, had done nothing to help a man in trouble a few hundred meters from her camp. Within 24 hours, the phrase was in every Spanish newspaper. Carlos Pauner spoke up next and confirmed the story about the rope removed from the uppermost section. Oh Yun-sun answered cautiously. She said that she had only learned about Tolo's serious condition after her own descent, and that by then she could no longer help anyone. There was a loophole in those formulations, but the Spanish public did not accept it. Meanwhile, her own Annapurna was coming under suspicion for an entirely different reason. Experts were re-examining her previous climb, Kangchenjunga, in 2009. The only proof was a single frame, and that frame was blurred. From it, it was impossible to tell where exactly the person was standing, on the summit, below the summit, on a false peak. The scandal about the refusal to help began turning into a scandal about the 14 8,000ers themselves. The story of Calafat's death and the story of the title, First in the World, twisted together into one single knot. And in the summer of 2010, that knot was untied in Seoul. And in the summer of 2010, that knot was untied in Seoul. On August 26th, the Korean Alpine Federation convened a special commission. 7 Korean climbers, who themselves had previously climbed Kangchenjunga, sat down at one table with photographs, maps, and satellite images. They looked at that very same blurred frame, compared the terrain, and delivered their verdict. Oh Yun-sun probably did not reach the true summit. A few years later, she herself would admit that she had stopped a few hundred meters short of the main point. The authoritative website Explorers Web refused to include her Kangchenjunga in the count. The first woman in the world to close out all 14 8,000ers was officially recognized as the Basque climber Edurne Pasaban, who that same year, in 2010, climbed Shishapangma. The Annapurna on which Tolo Calafat remained formally stayed credited to Oh Yun-sun, but she lost the status of the first. The story of the refusal to help a dying Spaniard ended up in the textbooks. It is written about as one of the most striking episodes of what the commercialization of the Himalayas led to, when a neighboring expedition a few hundred meters away will not send Sherpas, even for money. On Majorca today, mountain races, school prizes, and sports scholarships bear the name of Tolo Calafat. And up there, at 7,400 meters under the snow and many years of ice, there still lies a man who managed to say one last thing into the radio. For my children, take me down from here. Thanaporn Lorchira Chun Kul is sitting at home in Singapore when her phone lights up. A message from Nepal. Her husband never came back from the summit of Annapurna the night before. The personal Sherpa who was roped to him climbed down to camp on his own, injured with frostbitten fingers, and said it bluntly. Chin was left alone somewhere above 7,700 meters. Thanaporn calls the insurance company Global Rescue. They have a policy on her husband. It is paid for. It is active. They politely explain the difference. Their policy covers evacuation from a known location. Searching for a missing person at altitude is a different service. The insurance does not cover that. The clock is ticking. Her husband is lying on the ice with no oxygen, no tent, no water. Annapurna hangs up and starts calling helicopter companies directly, out of her own pocket, by herself. Wui Kin is a doctor, just like she is. 49 years old, Malaysian by birth, living and working in Singapore. A senior visiting consultant in anesthesiology at Ng Teng Fong Hospital. Before that, he worked at Khu Tek Puat, Alexandra, Tan Tock Seng, and the National University Hospital. His profession is to put other people to sleep before surgery, to keep someone else's breathing steady while the surgeon does the work. He finished medical school in Melbourne in '96 with an MBBS degree. He met Annapurna through work. She is a doctor too, originally from Thailand. The mountains came later. In his early 40s, Chin set himself a goal, the 7 summits, the highest points of all 7 continents. Alongside that, the 8,000ers started showing up on his list. Manaslu in the autumn of 2017, Everest on the 16th of May, 2018. And with that climb, the 7 Summits project was complete. Annapurna in the spring of 2019, that one was no longer about the project. That one was just for the love of altitude. Chin signs on with the Nepali agency 7 Summit Treks, the largest commercial operator in the Himalayas. The team has 32 climbers and 17 sherpas. The summit push is set for the 23rd of April, 2019. Chin is assigned a personal sherpa, Nima Tshering, 31 years old, from the village of Kumjung in Solukhumbu. He has a family and 3 children, and his salary is what keeps the household running. On the morning of the 23rd of April, around 15 hours 50, Chin and Nima are standing on the summit together with 30 other people, the biggest summit day on Annapurna that season. On the descent, Chin starts falling visibly behind. His breathing is heavy, his pace drops. Around 5 in the evening, at 7,750 meters at the entrance to the French couloir, Chin runs out of oxygen. Nima Tshering stops. He takes his last bottle off his harness and gives it to his client. That means one thing. From here on, the Sherpa goes down without oxygen, in the dark, at -30. On the way down, Nima gets frostbite on his fingers and a back injury after a fall. He keeps descending. 200 meters of descent take him hours. Around midnight on the 24th of April, Nima Tshering staggers into Camp 4 at 7,200. Over the radio, he says it first. The client is still up there, out of strength, out of oxygen, alone. That is the first word that Chin is still alive, and the first word that time is now counted in minutes, not hours. From the morning of the 24th of April, 7 summit treks start calling global rescue. By their own count, in the first 24 hours, more than 30 calls go to the insurance company. The answer does not change. Searching for a missing climber at altitude is not covered by the policy. Their contracted helicopter operators are not certified to fly above 7,000 meters. Night flights in Nepal are banned by law. There is one separate request, just to drop 6 oxygen bottles into Camp 4 so the Sherpas could climb up and try themselves. The insurance company turns that down too. Too dangerous, not in the contract. Captain Siddhartha Gurung from Simric Air would later tell journalists simply, "Clearance for the medical evacuation never came in time. Hour after hour, Chin is alone on the ice, while in some office, someone is rereading the fine print of a contract." On the morning of the 25th of April, Annapurna makes a decision that, in normal life, the wife of a patient should never have to make. She calls Simric Air herself, directly, and she personally guarantees, with her own signature, payment for the entire operation. The amount is around $40,000. The money is needed not in a bank account a week from now, but right now, before the helicopter takes off. Annapurna agrees to any terms, as long as the aircraft gets in the air immediately. Around 8 in the morning, the helicopter heads for the wall. The pilot flies along the route at the limit of his altitude, and after several passes he spots a tiny dot on the slope. A man waving weakly. Chin is alive. By that minute, he has been alone on the ice for almost 38 hours. The order goes out from the ground. Insert a rescue team into Camp 3 on a long line. At Camp 3, At 6,500 meters, 4 men are dropped off. Nirmal Purja, Mingma David Sherpa, Belgian Sherpa, Gesman Taming. Purja is a former British Special Forces operator. In 2 months, he will launch his own project, Project Possible, and climb all 14 8,000ers in 189 days. Right now, he has a different job. From Camp 3 to the spot where Chin is lying, it is 5 hours of steep climbing through deep snow. The team heads up at noon. At 17:30 on the 25th of April, they find Chin. He is on the slope, unconscious, with severe frostbite. The Sherpas give him water, hook him up to oxygen, and lay him on an improvised stretcher made of ropes. Before dark, they manage to bring him down to Camp 3. By the morning of the 26th of April, his condition is getting worse. They call in a helicopter for a long line evacuation. First attempt, a gust of wind, the pilot has to circle off. Second, a cloud rolls over the ridge, 0 visibility. Third, wind shear at the landing spot again. Only on the 4th attempt, at 9 in the morning, does it work. Chin is lifted on the long line and carried down through the gorge to the hospital pad. Medicity Hospital in Kathmandu admits him in critical condition. Severe hypothermia, serious frostbite, breathing problems. Annapurna is already there. She flew in from Singapore the day before, and now she is looking at her husband through the glass of the ICU. The same kind of machines he had stood next to for years at other people's bedsides are now hooked up to him. By the 26th of April, the story is already in the major outlets: Explorer's Web, Outside, the Himalayan Times, Adventure Blog. The headline runs in dozens of variations. Did a piece of insurance paper cost him his life? Nirmal Purja writes a separate post on his Facebook page. One line gets quoted everywhere. All the insurance company had to do was drop 6 oxygen bottles into Camp 4. Global Rescue replies, in detail. Their policy, in principle, does not cover searching for missing persons, and they had no right to risk helicopters and pilots at altitudes their contractors are not certified for. At the same time, Nima Charing himself is admitted to hospital. He has 3 frostbitten fingers, a cervical spine injury, a back injury. He will not be able to work as a high-altitude Sherpa for at least 1 full season. A friend of his from Everest, the astronomer and climber Marina Cortez, opens a GoFundMe for his treatment and for his children's education. The fund quickly passes $15,000. The money comes in from every continent. At the end of April, Chin is transferred by air medical service from Kathmandu to Singapore. Annapurna flies with him. At Singapore General Hospital, her husband is hooked up to the machines. The diagnoses pile up, one on top of another. The aftermath of severe hypothermia, extensive frostbite, complications from many hours at 8,000 meters, a heavy infection. The anesthesiologist, who for years had put other patients to sleep before surgery, is now lying in the intensive care unit himself. For several days, the doctors fight for him. Annapurna almost never leaves the hospital. The Malaysian community in Singapore brings food and notes. On the 2nd of May, 2019, 9 days after the summit and 7 days after the rescue, Wui Kin is gone. The official cause is multiple organ failure following the climb. Annapurna asks the press not to disturb the family and refuses every interview. The story moves into the textbooks on mountain insurance. After 2019, Global Rescue tightens the wording of its policies. Search and rescue are now spelled out as separate items. Several competing companies launch new tiers that explicitly include searching for missing climbers. 6 bottles of oxygen at 7,200 meters turned out, as one columnist put it, to weigh more than the paper sitting on a desk in an insurance office. Remember the very first story in this video? The one that began in the spring of 2023, when an Indian climber was pulled out of an ice crevasse on Annapurna alive? Now we go back to that same week, to the same mountain, just into a different tent, high up at 7,400 meters. There, a man from Northern Ireland had just become the first person from the island of Ireland ever to stand on top of Annapurna. Behind him were 10 ascents of Everest and a climb of K2. He drank some hot soup, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. No drama, no shouts on the radio. The story that will close out our collection. April 17th, 2023. a Monday. Camp 4 on Annapurna 1, around 7,400 meters. Inside a tent, a 56-year-old man from Northern Ireland is sleeping. A few hours earlier, he had become the first person from the island of Ireland to reach the summit of Annapurna. 45 years earlier on this same mountain, two women stayed behind forever. Alison Chadwick-Onyszkiewicz and Vera Watson, the two who opened the way for everyone who came after them. Now, in April 2023, in a tent at Camp 4, there is a different person. This is the same week when, lower down the slope, on this very day, Anurag Maloo will fall into a crevasse and later be pulled out alive. Maloo will come back from the mountain. This man will stay. His name is Noel Hanna. Noel Hanna was born and raised in a small village called Dromara in County Down. More precisely, in the hamlet of Finnis, beneath the slopes of Slieve Croob, where his father ran a farm with cows, pigs, and sheep. Northern Ireland, the 80s, the era people there simply call the Troubles. Young Noel joins the police force, and after his service he retrains as a personal protection officer. Alongside that, long adventure races, multi-day endurance trips, his first serious mountains. He doesn't come into climbing as a teenager or as a prodigy. He comes to it as a grown man who already has a life behind him, a job, and hard professional experience. That matters. Noel isn't one of those people the mountains caught in their youth. He chose them himself, deliberately, with a cool head. In the year 2000, a notice goes up in the gym of a hotel. Noel Hanna is looking for a teammate for an adventure race. A woman named Lynn replies, herself an athlete, a runner, tough, with a real character. She won't actually make it to that first race, but by then they already know each other, and somehow neither of them wants to walk away. She will become his wife, and more importantly, his constant partner in the mountains. Dozens of expeditions will pass through her hands. In this story, Lynn is not the figure from a tabloid headline who waits at home and stares at the phone. She is herself a top-class climber. She has stood beside Noel at 8,000 meters several times. And that is exactly why everything that happens next, she will understand without anyone needing to explain it. Over his career, Noel will summit Everest 10 times. 10. One of the strongest British records on that mountain, full stop. He will make his last Everest in May 2021 at 8:30 in the morning, climbing from the Nepalese side. In 2016, he and Lynn become the first married couple in the world to climb Everest from both sides, Nepalese and Tibetan. 2 years later, Noel becomes the first person from the island of Ireland to climb K2, the second highest, the one climbers call the most unforgiving of the 8,000ers, and he comes back down alive. And in 2019, the two of them stand together on the summit of Manaslu, without oxygen bottles. Lynn becomes the first woman from the island of Ireland to climb an 8,000er without oxygen. Noel, the first man from Northern Ireland to do the same. On the big peaks, Noel prefers to go without bottles. Not out of bravado, not for the headlines. On principle. The mountain has to be real. The climb has to stay a climb, not a sped-up walk along somebody else's rope. It is a deliberate choice from a mature man who knows exactly what he is doing. Without oxygen, the body works at its absolute limit. Every step costs 10 times more than it would down low. The oxygen in your blood drops, your head slows down, every thought turns thick and sticky. Recovery takes hours, and up there, hours are something you don't have. Noel had shown many times that he could carry that load. Manaslu in 2019 is the clearest proof. Both husband and wife on top without bottles, both back down. He goes on to Annapurna in April 2023 by the same rule. Light pack, no mask on his face, his own breath, his own rhythm. The 2023 season on Annapurna is rough. Broken weather, unstable slopes, high avalanche danger. Noel is part of an expedition run by the Nepalese operator Seven Summit Treks. Lynn isn't with him on this one. She stays back home in Northern Ireland. With Noel on the mountain are Naila Kiani, a banker from Dubai, for whom this is a chance to become the first Pakistani woman on Annapurna. Shehroze Kashif, a 20-year-old climber, one of the youngest high-altitude alpinists in Pakistan. Ku Sui Chow from Singapore. The team is strong, experienced, motivated. On the 16th of April, at 7 in the evening, the group leaves Camp 4 for the final summit push. Dark, wind, a long, heavy night ahead. Noel is going without oxygen. Shayrose and Naila are using bottles. Each chooses their own strategy. The night between the 16th and 17th of April is the hardest section of the route. Strong wind, low temperatures, thick darkness at 7,800 meters. The group moves slowly, but with no breakdowns. Every step measured, every knot checked twice. Noel moves at his own pace, without a bottle, saving strength for the long way back. By 7 in the morning, the group reaches the ridge. Annapurna 1, 8,091 meters. Sometime between 6:30 and 7:30 on the morning of April 17th, they are standing on the summit. Naila Kiani becomes the first Pakistani woman on this mountain. Shayrose Kashif adds another 8,000er to his record, one of the youngest people in the world ever to be at this altitude. Noel becomes the first person from the island of Ireland to summit Annapurna. A few photographs, a short congratulation over the radio. Then, the descent. The descent from Annapurna on this route is known to be more dangerous than the climb up. The slope is constantly shifting. The snow under your feet sometimes holds and sometimes gives way. Noel descends slowly but carefully, the way he always moved. Somewhere during these same hours, lower on the mountain, between Camp 2 and Camp 3, Anurag Maloo drops into an ice crevasse. He is seen, he is lost, and what is about to begin will be one of the loudest rescues of the season. But Noel, up high, doesn't know any of this yet. He reaches Camp 4, around 7,400 meters. Tense, wind, the rustle of thin nylon. One of his teammates will say later that Noel looked very tired, drained beyond the usual measure. But he doesn't complain. He made it. Now, rest. Inside the tent, Noel takes off his crampons. He unbuckles his harness, sets the ice axe in the corner, climbs into his sleeping bag. He asks for hot soup, a normal recovery routine at altitude. Liquid, warmth, salt. The simplest things, which at 7,000 meters work like medicine. He drinks the soup. He closes his eyes. From the outside, it looks like the normal sleep of a tired man after a big day. No warning signs, no drama, no calls for help on the radio. The altitude, the exhaustion, a body without supplemental oxygen. All of it works silently, gently, almost invisibly. The sleep grows deeper, steadier, calmer. Somewhere that same night, far below in Pokhara, doctors are getting ready to receive the injured coming off the mountain. But up here, into the tent at Camp 4, no one can reach in time anymore. Noel falls asleep and never wakes up. In the morning at Camp 4, his companions try to wake Noel. He doesn't answer. There is nothing left to do. No radio, no helicopter, no sherpas, who right now are barely holding themselves up in this thin air. 56-year-old Noel Hanna, 10 Everests, K2, Manaslu without oxygen, the 6th Irishman to complete the 7 summits, did not survive that night. The exact cause will never be established. Most likely altitude sickness, exhaustion, strain on the heart. A combination of factors that, at this height, the body simply has no reserves left to fight. The mountain doesn't let him go right away. For a few more days, Noel stays up there, while the team below puts together a recovery group. Then he is brought down by helicopter. In Kathmandu, very different people are already waiting for him. On the other side of the world, in Northern Ireland, it is still night. When the message reaches Lynn Hanna, outside her window, there is the quiet spring darkness of County Down. Lynn is herself an experienced climber. No one needs to explain to her what "didn't wake up at Camp 4" means. She knows that altitude, she knows those tents, she knows how the air smells up there, how the snow creaks underfoot. Within hours, she is on the road. The flight to Kathmandu is long, with connections halfway around the earth. She is going to her husband, not the inconsolable widow from a newspaper column, but a woman who has walked these same routes with him many times, calm, composed, climber sober. In Kathmandu, she will write a short post. And with that post, more than just the story of Noel Hanna will close. With that post, 10 stories on one mountain will close. Lynn writes publicly, for friends, for the climbing community, for everyone who had been following Noel. She writes the way only someone who has been at that altitude many times can. No newspaper cliches, no long words. He passed away at Camp 4 on Annapurna. After a successful summit, he returned to his tent, had hot soup, and fell asleep never to awaken again. No drama, no big story. It was his time to go. He died in the Himalayas. What better place for my mountain man? Sleep well, Noel. Within a day those lines travel around the world. Newspapers in Belfast, Dublin, London, Kathmandu reprint them. With this quiet post from Northern Ireland, the story of Annapurna closes. And with that same post, our collection closes.